Earlier this month, the Bureau of Land Management announced its final approval of the Lava Ridge Wind Project in Idaho's Magic Valley. The project will include 241 wind turbines and related infrastructure on BLM and state land in Jerome, Lincoln, and Minidoka counties. The project could power as many as 500,000 homes, but it has not come without controversy. Joining me to discuss the project is Robison from the Idaho Conservation League and Representative Lance Clow from Twin Falls. Representative Clow, this plan has had widespread opposition since its first proposal. Walk me through the concerns in Magic Valley.
Well, there's a lot of concerns in the Magic Valley. Some of the groups that have gotten a lot of attention include the Friends of Minidoka, which is the Japanese internment camp and its facility, and how close this was going to come to their facility, and the importance of maintaining that facility so that when people visit, they can get a feel for what was it like to have been interned there. And I've had a recent conversation with one of the leaders of that group to find out how they feel about this change, but that's one of the groups. But the others aren't necessarily all groups, they're just citizens that were concerned, and everything from the hunting community worried about what's going to happen out there, to the water community, the people that have groundwater. This is being built over the aquifer, which is the main source of groundwater for the Magic Valley. And what happens when you start blasting and during the construction phase, or if it's ever eliminated, what happens when you blast to remove all of this construction, to the potential damage to aquifers. Maybe not the major aquifer, but that's always at risk, but the individual personal wells that are spread out around the area. One of the main concerns that I always questioned was, why would we do this in Idaho, even though it's on federal land? Why would we do this in Idaho when most of the power is planned to go to Nevada and California? They have plenty of open lands in Nevada and California. If they want to put in a wind project for their purposes, go down there. Why should we get all the negative impacts of that? So I mean, we can go down a long list and you can prompt me with other ideas, but those are some of the major issues that I have.
Several different concerns, several different groups, and a lot of those concerns intersect with what the Idaho Conservation League is concerned with when we're talking about sage grouse habitat and water conservation and public lands. Ultimately, ICL supported the revised plan this summer, down from 600 turbines to the 241 in this final version, calling it not perfect but necessary. What got you on board?
Well, I think that the Lava Ridge project is something that was just frankly a really exhausting process for so many people, because so many people care about that landscape. And really, I have to say it, in all my years working at the Idaho Conservation League on public lands advocacy, it was really heartening to see so many people come out for sage grouse and for their wildlife, their recreation opportunities out there. And finally, you know, the BLM had kind of looked at this as a blank spot on the map that was open for development. And really what came from so many people was that there are special places that needed to be protected, including 13,000 acres around the Minidoka National Historic Site, as well as the wildlife corridor for pronghorn coming down, that Windsor pronghorn corridor. And so at first, we didn't see any alternatives that the Idaho Conservation League liked. But ultimately, after so many people spoke out about the project and their values there, it was at the 11th hour, but the BLM finally, from our perspective, really took those concerns to heart, basically dropped almost half the project, and not only dropped the project and set aside the place for a renewable project, probably about the right size where it should have been from the start if they had listened, but also they actually are enacting protections for those other places. And so from our perspective, given the crucial role that renewable energy is going to play, we thought it was worth to support the project to advance the conversation.
You know, you mentioned that this was not the first version of the project that they submitted to the public. The BLM reduced the general project area by about half. They reduced the ground disturbance by 50%, reduced access roads by about 50%. Still a big project. You said it seems like they looked at a spot on the map and said, that looks empty, without realizing the proximity to the Minidoka internment camp historical site. They did reduce it. There's still opposition. There are still major concerns. Was there any version of this project that you or your peers in the legislature or Magic Valley would have found more palatable?
Well, my answer is no, I don't think so, because it's still a huge project, and it will have major impacts, whether or not you're blasting for 240 turbines or 600 turbines. There's still a risk to our aquifer. There's still risk to the wildlife, as you mentioned, whether or not it's pronghorns or sage grouse. And it's fascinating to me, because when I first joined the legislature and elected in 2012, the big issue was China Mountain, which was south of Twin Falls, and up in the mountains, away from a lot of people, not over our aquifer. And the big question is, what do we do with the sage grouse impact? There's sage grouse all over the West. There's sage grouse everywhere, it seems. And so that seemed to be the big conservation fight at that time. We got to protect the sage grouse. Well, that project was denied, and that was 170 some wind turbines, and most people that I was aware of in the Magic Valley felt comfortable with that project. So they turned that down because of the conservation issues, but then they approved this project, which has tremendous risk to our aquifer. And you take away our aquifer and damage our aquifer, that's a problem. And when I first joined the city council, the big fight was over the INL and the disposal of their waste over our aquifer. And the conservation groups were all opposed to that. So suddenly, this aquifer is not important, you know, and there's a lot of other reasons why people oppose it, but that's one of my concerns.
One thing we know is that water is life, and that protecting Idaho's clean water is one of the Idaho Conservation League's core values. And so we took a very hard look and pressed the BLM really, really hard on the aquifer, and we found that they largely had addressed our concerns. So we looked at that and the sage-grouse issues, and sage-grouse populations have plummeted recently, and so it is of a concern. We do want to protect our sage-grouse and our core habitat. We think the project does a better job. One of the issues with aquifers that we're really concerned about is basically drought caused by climate change. And so we've seen this in the last 10 years, 9 of the last 10 years have been the hottest in recorded history. We've seen droughts, wildfire seasons have extended 60 to 80 days longer every year. We've seen this on the Boise National Forest with one of the biggest fire seasons here. So climate change is here, it's coming, and we really need to upgrade our energy system to basically try to address that and protect our quality of life. But I agree, we need to do it in a way that works with the community and listens to their concerns first rather than afterwards.
I love the China Mountain throwback, because I was in Twin Falls in 2012, and ICL, the Idaho Conservation League, opposed that project. Looking at things like rising global temperatures and sage grouse habitat and the need for renewable energy, how does that calculus change project proposal by project proposal? How do you determine what you support and what you don't?
Well, I look at this whole project as fascinating. We're worried about climate change. These are not fans that are going to cool us down. These are fans that are taking the energy out of the wind. And so it's whether it impacts global warming or whatever, that to me was never a major concern. And there is one group I didn't mention, there's a lot of people that are concerned with any continuing investment by the federal government to make these projects economically feasible. So, so that group's out there as well. But,
opposing the federal government being involved in this at all.
So there are people that would say, why should we be building all these wind turbines to generate green energy for conservation purposes, when the impact of mining and construction and movement to build these things is a tremendous impact on greenhouse gases. So what's the trade-off? Do we break even? Yeah. And is it worth the risk?
We've actually taken a really hard look at that, and one of the things is that if we keep our coal-fired power plants and our massive extensive oil and gas development on public lands as well, that every time we turn on the lights or turn our cars, we are mining. Basically, they're using mined materials, dirty fossil fuels going into our atmosphere. It does take materials to mine to build the infrastructure for renewable energy projects, but once it's built, the wind blows and the sun shines, and you have geothermal coming up. And so then you're not mining every time you go and not basically overheating our planet and actually putting our quality of life and our just community health and the viability of our economy at risk.
Does the benefit to Idaho versus other states, and this is something that Representative Clow touched on earlier, that a lot of this power is almost certainly going to go out of state. Does that play into the calculation on whether to support a project like this or not?
Right. And every project is a little unique and different. And one of the things that we have to recognize is that Idaho isn't energy independent. We have a lot of renewables in terms of hydropower, but we import a third of our energy from other states. And it was actually several years ago, and I imagine you were involved with this, but when Sempra coal-fired power plant was proposed in Twin Falls, it was unanimously rejected by the community because you'd have immediate pollution concerns, whether it's mercury or poor air quality, plus the climate risks. And the community, as with Lava Ridge, rallied, in support of clean air there. And but the dirty secret is that we are still importing energy from coal-fired power plants in other places, and that are having local impacts as well as heating up the climate. And so the more we can do to diversify our economy, to actually get energy independence, the stronger our communities are going to be. And yes, we will probably export some energy and import some energy. It's a grid. And so, but the main thing that the lesson learned, I think, is that companies need to work in advance with local communities to learn what their concerns are, see what works, what doesn't, how communities might want to benefit from this, and also what places aren't appropriate. So I think we could learn a lot of lessons about how this went down.
I was going to add that it was suggested earlier, is there any level of this that would be acceptable? And I think a lot of people would feel more acceptable to ideas about green energy if we knew it was going to stay in Idaho. Mm-hmm. So you're not. So we have to take all the negative effects in order so that Nevada and California can say, "Hey, look, we're green," and look at Idaho's still importing energy from out of state. But I know Idaho Power has made a tremendous commitment to be green, and I can't remember what their deadline is. And they are doing projects that are solar powered and wind powered. And if this had been an Idaho Power project, it may have been met with a little bit different reaction. And I was involved with the writing of the resolution HCR 4 in 2023. Yeah, 2023.
To oppose
the Lava Ridge project. And I was very careful. We did not say we would oppose any and all wind projects, because there may be a time, it may be 20 years from now or 30 years from now, maybe it may be next week that Idaho Power comes out and says, well, we need some land to do this, and they might come in with a small project that would incrementally grow, and not just look at California that is sucking the energy out of the country to live their lifestyles and have all the negative impacts in Idaho.
Right. I think that's a good point in that right now, Idaho already gets 16% of our energy from wind power, and those are on private property. And even the new projects that are in the pipeline have been developed with local community support from the county commissioners and from the private property owners involved. But it took a lot of time in advance to build those relationships and to craft the project. I think one of the big things about this, again, the take-home message for me, which is how much Idahoans really love their public lands, and I think that's a great thing. A lot of the issues, if on private property, even state property, we don't have as much of a say. And so that's where I was really impressed to see, as a result of all the public comments, the BLM finally, at the 11th hour, did make a turn. Maybe not enough for some, but it did make a big difference, larger than any project I've seen. So I thought that it's a learning lesson.
The proposal came under the Biden administration, and that administration is, of course, ending in January. Governor Brad Little tweeted out after this came out, quote, "We'll see about that after January 20th." That, of course, is the day President-elect Donald Trump is taking office. What have you heard on efforts to stop this from going through?
Well, I haven't heard anything directly other than comments like this and the things that I've read. But I do know that our congressional delegation has opposed Lava Ridge from the beginning. And the only group that seemed to support it was the investors themselves. And we had a lot of ads in the local papers and stuff in support of it, but it was all paid for by the developer. But we have to consider, where do we go from here? And we look at the XL pipeline, and that was independently destroyed and ended by an executive order. So I can imagine we could see an executive order to put an end to this, and I would fully support that. When we were writing HCR 4, we were looking at that prospectus, what do we do here in the future and whatever. And I specifically added the words, the no-build option.
And can you expand on that? What does that mean?
Well, a no-build is you do nothing. You don't approve it. But a developer comes in and they ask for 600 wind turbines and they get 240. And maybe they're very happy that they got 240 because maybe that was the minimum that they could survive with. But if they got anything more than that, that's just more power to sell to California and Nevada. So it's like, if you pick one of these options, it doesn't make it better. It just means that they played the game right, and that there was no game that we could play to say that, oh, well, we need the green energy, and besides that, it is out in the middle of nowhere, and who cares? And Idaho's population is relatively low, and the population density of that area is minimal. But if you look at how much water that impacts, it's tremendous. And when I first joined City Council, the Conservation League was very much opposed to any activity at INL nuclear because they would say, well, what if it gets in the aquifer? And there were talks about it might take 100 or 200 years for it to drift anywhere near someone to be, and that it would be so diluted it wouldn't matter. But the fight back then about what do we do with the nuclear waste that's being stored up there was tremendous by the conservation side to stop it. They didn't want any, zero, aquifer protected. Now it's like, well, we can take some risk. It's okay as long as we get some green energy.
Well, I think if you have to look at the real risk that I'm looking at is for the aquifer is actually in the upper Snake River Plain, you've got the Kilgore Gold Project, which is an open pit cyanide heap leach mine in the exploration phase, and that actually could pose a real significant risk to water users in that area. And so, but one of the big risks just in general for water is going to be climate change. Again, from drought, wildfires, hydroelectric power is a huge part of Idaho's electric generation, but even the reliability of that has decreased dramatically because of droughts and the uncertainty there. So it's really all about trying to diversifying things, protecting what's best, and also making sure that we've got a healthy future for our communities.
I don't know by name the mines you're talking about. I believe, though, the mine you're referencing is actually not in the Snake River drainage. I believe it's in the Salmon River drainage.
No. Different one.
Okay.
There's many mines out there. Yeah, a couple mines. Yeah.
But how many years will it take before I want to call it the stibnite mine, to get approved? So it's like you're against everything, unless I'm sorry.
No,
it's like every economic project, and the wind power, the solar power requires all these minerals, and if we don't mine for the minerals in the United States, where are we going to get those minerals? Right. We're going to have to import everything. And who just is the biggest, one of the lithium exporters now is China. So we need everything. We have to be totally dependent upon China.
We just produced a monitoring report on that exact issue.
Everything's always connected. Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. John Robison, Idaho Conservation League, and Representative Lance Clow from Twin Falls.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.